The sharp whine of the escape pod's engine cut through the thick, suffocating atmosphere as Captain Lydia Hayes clutched the controls with all the strength she could muster. Earth's skies were a battlefield, a storm of chaos as fire rained from above, and alien drones circled like vultures, tracking her every move. Her hands were shaking, the pod barely holding together after taking several hits. The outside world seemed to blur into a nightmarish mess of smoke and debris, but Lydia's focus was sharp. She had to escape. The escape pod, a battered piece of old military technology, wasn't designed to survive the brutal conditions of Earth's war-torn atmosphere, let alone the constant bombardment from the alien drones. But Lydia had been through worse. She had grown up on this planet, a world so dangerous and unstable that the aliens called it a Deathworld. For them, it was a place where no life could survive for long. But Lydia was still alive. Somehow, against all odds, she was still alive. Her escape was nothing short of a miracle. It was supposed to be impossible. The Galactic Council had watched Earth for centuries, declaring it too chaotic, too violent, too deadly for any species to thrive. They had isolated the planet, cutting off any chance of contact or escape for its inhabitants. But here she was, the last survivor of Earth, fleeing toward the stars. And the Council was terrified. From a distant planet, the leaders of the Galactic Council were watching the human escape with growing panic. They had long believed that Earth was a lost cause, a dead world that would never leave its chaotic orbit. They had kept their distance, monitoring the planet from afar, believing no human could ever survive long enough to make it into space. But Lydia had done the unthinkable. She had escaped, and now she was racing toward the unknown. They had never prepared for this. The holographic screens inside the council chamber flickered with alarm as they tracked her movements. They could see her pod on their sensors, the signature flashing bright red. The drones that had detected her were closing in fast, laser fire streaking toward her like deadly lightning. Every shot that missed was a reminder that she was running out of time. The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council was unsure of their control over the galaxy. If humanity had learned to survive on a planet as brutal as Earth, then the threat they posed could be far worse than they had ever anticipated. As the alien drones continued their relentless pursuit, Lydia pushed the pod to its limits. She gritted her teeth, feeling the pod shudder violently as it struggled to stay intact. The vibrations of the engine rattled her bones, but she had no choice. She had trained for situations like this, where every second counted. She adjusted the pod's trajectory, aiming for the higher atmosphere, where the drones would have less maneuverability. She wasn't a soldier for nothing. She was the last of her kind, and she wasn't going to let some alien drone stop her. The fire from the drones hit her pod again. Sparks flew from the control panel, and alarms blared. The pod shook uncontrollably as a small explosion erupted from the back, sending a shockwave through the metal frame. Lydia's vision blurred for a moment, but she blinked it away, focusing on the task at hand. The pod was falling apart, but she refused to give in. She had to survive. The drones were closing in fast, their weapons locked and aimed. Lydia had no more time. With a final desperate maneuver, she activated the pod's cloaking system. The pod shimmered briefly, then vanished from sight, hidden from the alien sensors. For a brief moment, there was silence. Lydia's heart pounded in her chest as she held her breath. She couldn't let the council catch her now, not when she was so close to freedom. The drone zipped past her, unaware of her presence. Lydia released a shaky breath and allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had made it. She had escaped, at least for now. But the real challenge had only just begun. The Galactic Council would stop at nothing to prevent her from reaching the stars. They would do anything to ensure that no human ever left Earth alive. And Lydia knew that if she was to survive, she had to get off this planet and into the unknown depths of space, before the Council could catch up with her. In a dark control room far across the galaxy, the Galactic Council's leaders were in a state of utter disbelief. The last human, a soldier who had somehow survived the deadliest world known to the galaxy, had escaped their surveillance. The holographic map in front of them showed her trajectory as she entered the quiet void of space, heading toward a distant sector where they had no immediate control. Their panic was mounting. One human escaping was one thing, but the implications of this act were far more dangerous than they could have imagined. For centuries, the Council had controlled the galaxy's inhabitants with an iron fist. Their rule was absolute, and any species that threatened the established order was quickly subdued or destroyed. But Lydia Hayes was different. She was the embodiment of everything the Council feared. An unpredictable, dangerous human who had escaped a world thought to be a lost cause. "Prepare the fleet," one of the Council leaders ordered, his voice trembling. "We cannot allow this to continue. A single human escaping Earth could mean the end of our control over the galaxy." The tension in the Council chamber was electric. They had underestimated the humans for too long, believing them to be nothing more than chaotic creatures destined for extinction. But now they had seen the true nature of humanity. Lydia Hayes had survived, and that survival was a threat they could not ignore. They would have to stop her before she could reach the outer territories, or else they risked the collapse of everything they had worked for. Lydia, still cloaked and hidden from the alien sensors, made her way toward the distant stars. Earth's gravity had long since released its hold on her, and she was free, at least for now. But the uncertainty of the galaxy loomed ahead. The Council's fleet would be hunting her soon, and Lydia would need all the skills she had learned from surviving on Earth's deadly surface to outwit them. Her escape from the planet was nothing short of a miracle, but as she glanced back toward Earth, she knew the real fight had only just begun. The galaxy, with all its advanced technology and power, was about to learn the true meaning of humanity's resilience, and Lydia was ready to show them that a Deathworld survivor, like her, was more than capable of surviving anything they threw her way. The race to the stars had begun, and Lydia Hayes was about to prove that humans, against all odds, could overcome even the greatest of challenges. Lydia's escape pod was drifting in the cold, vast emptiness of space, surrounded by nothing but the endless black void and distant stars. Earth, the only home she had ever known, was far behind her now, a smoldering battlefield consumed by war, famine, and a collapsing environment. But despite her escape, Lydia knew that her journey was far from over. The real danger had only just begun. With her pod's energy reserves dangerously low and the systems barely functioning, Lydia activated the emergency comms unit. She knew it was a risk. Any signal sent out would attract attention. And right now, the last thing she wanted was more alien attention. But she had no choice. She needed help, or she would never make it to safety. She keyed in the distress signal with trembling hands, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke into the microphone. "This is Captain Lydia Hayes, last survivor of Earth, requesting immediate assistance. I need help. Anyone who can hear this." As the words left her mouth, Lydia couldn't help but feel the weight of her situation. She had survived the deadly conditions of Earth, but space was an entirely different challenge. Her escape had been a miracle, and now she was alone, completely alone. There was no telling how long it would take for anyone to receive her signal, or even if anyone would respond. But she had to try. Back on the Galactic Council's homeworld, the response to Lydia's distress signal was immediate. The alien leaders, who had been watching her escape in horror, knew they couldn't let her get away. One human surviving on a Deathworld was one thing, but escaping into space, that was a whole new threat. They had underestimated the resilience of humanity, and now they were going to ensure that no more humans would ever escape Earth. The Council's elite military forces, an impressive fleet of highly advanced warships, drones, and robotic soldiers, were dispatched immediately. They had studied humanity's technology, and they knew that Lydia's escape pod wasn't something to be taken lightly. They had to act quickly, or she might escape into the outer reaches of the galaxy where they couldn't find her. Lydia, still in the silent void of space, had no idea that the Council was already on her tail. Her mind was focused on survival. As the pod systems flickered, struggling to stay operational, she glanced at the small control panel. The fuel reserves were almost gone. The pod's engines were barely functional. She had only one shot at escaping the alien forces. But for that, she needed to rely on the last of her training and resourcefulness. Her military training kicked in. Lydia had been trained for combat and survival, but nothing could have prepared her for the situation she was facing now. She had learned to think quickly, adapt to changing environments, and make do with whatever she had. The escape pod was equipped with a basic cloaking device, a piece of outdated technology, but it was her only hope. Her heart pounded in her chest as she activated the pod's cloaking system. The pod shimmered and then vanished from view, blending into the background of space. It was a temporary solution, one that would only last as long as the pod's energy reserves allowed. But for now, it would have to do. As she turned the pod, trying to steer it away from the alien forces, Lydia could feel the tension building. Every moment counted. The cloaking device was not foolproof, and she knew that the aliens would be scanning the area for her. The stakes were high. If they found her, it would be the end. If she could evade them long enough, she might be able to escape to a distant sector of space where they wouldn't be able to reach her. But the obstacles ahead were just as dangerous as the alien fleet pursuing her. Lydia could see them ahead. Asteroid fields, drifting space debris, and the occasional wreckage of long-forgotten ships. She had to navigate through all of it, carefully avoiding the deadly obstacles while staying hidden from the scanners. The tension in the pod was thick. She gripped the controls tightly, her breath shallow as she maneuvered with precision. Her mind raced. Every decision, every movement, had to be perfect. She could hear the hum of the pod's engines, the soft beeping of the damaged systems. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move, and the drones would catch her, or worse, the robotic soldiers would lock onto her position and board the pod. The Council's forces weren't known for mercy. If they caught her, they would make sure that she would never escape again. Her fingers hovered over the controls as she approached the asteroid field. The larger rocks floated in space like silent giants, their jagged edges a deadly trap for anyone who wasn't careful. Lydia held her breath, focusing all of her energy on the task at hand. She had to thread the needle, weaving the pod through the narrow gaps between the asteroids, all while keeping the cloaking device active. The pod jolted as a piece of debris grazed the side, scraping against the metal with a screeching sound. Lydia winced, but there was no time to dwell on it. She quickly corrected the trajectory, pushing the pod forward with every ounce of her remaining strength. The damaged systems groaned in protest, but Lydia didn't care. She had to make it. As she navigated the asteroid field, Lydia couldn't help but think about Earth. The place she had called home. The place that had shaped her into who she was. A place that the Council had dismissed as a lost cause. A planet where no species could thrive. But they had been wrong. Lydia had survived. And now she was proving them all wrong once again. She glanced at the control panel, the flickering lights of the pod's malfunctioning systems casting a dim glow on her face. The cloaking device was still active, but Lydia could feel it draining the pod's energy reserves. She couldn't rely on it for much longer. If the energy ran out, she would be visible again, vulnerable to the alien fleet. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The asteroid field thinned out, but Lydia's relief was short-lived. She knew the Council's fleet was still out there, hunting for her. The tension in her chest didn't let up. Every second she spent in space was a gamble. Would the aliens find her? Would she be able to reach a safe zone before the pod systems gave out? Just as Lydia thought she might be free, she heard a noise, a distant hum, like the approach of something large. Her heart skipped a beat. The fleet. The Council had sent their drones to intercept her, and they were closing in fast. Her pulse raced as she looked at the dwindling energy gauge. This was it. Lydia had only one option left. She disabled the cloaking device, knowing that she had to make her final move. It was a risk, but it was the only chance she had left. Her hands were shaking as she prepared to activate the pod's emergency thrusters and blast into the open space. If she could make it far enough, she might be able to escape. But the countdown to the alien drones finding her had already begun. Would she survive long enough to reach the deeper regions of space, where the Council's influence couldn't reach? Or would this be her final stand? Lydia's only hope was the possibility of finding someone, anyone, who might help her. But for now, she was alone, with the entire galaxy hunting her down. The terrifying truth was that Earth's last survivor was a target, and a galactic council would stop at nothing to ensure that no human would ever escape their control. Lydia Hayes had barely had a moment to catch her breath when the unmistakable hum of alien engines filled her pod's sensors. She had made it to a remote sector of space, far from the Council's watchful eyes, or so she thought. The escape pod, a battered, patched-up relic of Earth's old military technology, floated in the void, its cloaking device failing after the heavy use. Lydia had hoped that by getting far enough into deep space, she could find safety, maybe even stumble upon an uncharted colony or an old outpost where she could regroup and get help. But the harsh reality hit her like a bolt of lightning when the sensor display lit up with an incoming fleet. The Council had found her. The last thing Lydia wanted to do was engage them in battle. She wasn't a soldier anymore, just one woman in a broken pod against an entire fleet of advanced alien warships. But these weren't just any warships. They were part of the Council's most elite forces, drones and robotic soldiers designed to be merciless, efficient, and lethal. As the fleet closed in, Lydia's heart raced. Her mind quickly went through her options, but the truth was, there weren't many. She was outgunned, outnumbered, and isolated. The Council didn't just want to capture her. They wanted to eliminate her, make sure that humanity's last survivor could never make it to another civilization. Earth had been their experiment, their playground, and they couldn't allow any human to escape and potentially disrupt their control over the galaxy. Lydia's pod was weak, its systems barely hanging on, and the few weapons it was equipped with were far too primitive to challenge the Council's fleet. But there was one thing that Lydia had that the aliens couldn't anticipate: the ingenuity and survival instincts that had kept humanity alive on Earth's deadliest, most hostile planet. She sat in the cockpit, her hands gripped tightly on the controls. The alien fleet was closing in fast, their sleek warships coming into view. Their weapons were ready, and Lydia could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as she realized that her only choice was to fight. She might be outmatched in every way, but she would not go down without making them regret it. The first shot rang out, the pulse of energy cutting through space as the alien ships fired, targeting her pod. The blast hit the pod's weakened shields, causing the entire craft to shudder violently. Lydia gritted her teeth, her knuckles white, as she fought to keep the pod under control. There was no way she could outrun them. Her only option was to use what she had, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Her mind raced as she accessed the pod's malfunctioning systems. She had nothing to lose. The pod was already falling apart. She couldn't rely on the cloaking device anymore. The systems were already overloaded, and the alien ships were closing in too fast. Thinking quickly, Lydia reprogrammed the pod's energy reserves, diverting all power to the main weapon system. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The pod's cannon had a single shot left, a last-ditch attempt to save herself. She aimed carefully, targeting the closest enemy ship, and fired. The blast exploded in a burst of blinding light, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. Lydia's pod jolted from the force of the explosion, the hull creaking under the pressure. She was thrown against her seat, but she barely noticed. The blast had taken out the first enemy ship, but the other ships were closing in fast. She couldn't stop now. As the alien fleet regrouped, preparing for another attack, Lydia slammed the pod's thrusters into overdrive, pushing the pod to its limits. The pod shook violently as she engaged in a high-speed maneuver, darting through the remnants of debris and asteroid fields in a desperate attempt to outmaneuver the Council's ships. The pod's engines sputtered and groaned, but it held together, and Lydia's fingers flew over the controls as she performed one evasive maneuver after another. She could feel the heat of the alien fire just behind her, the flashing lights from the enemy ships illuminating the darkness of space as they pursued her relentlessly. Lydia's mind was working on overdrive, calculating trajectories, reading the enemy's movements. She knew the Council's tactics. They would try to box her in, corner her, and force her to fight. But Lydia wasn't going to make it easy for them. She had spent years on Earth, learning to survive against impossible odds. If there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against all expectations. Lydia had fought through the worst of Earth's horrors. Now she was fighting to survive against a fleet of aliens, and she would not give up. She sped toward an asteroid field, weaving between the large rocks as the enemy ships followed closely behind. Lydia could hear the whine of the enemy engines getting louder as they pursued her through the debris. Her pulse raced as she forced the pod into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a collision with a massive asteroid. She glanced at her display. The aliens were still on her tail. She had to buy herself more time. In a desperate bid, Lydia made another drastic move. She sent the pod spiraling into an unstable trajectory, causing it to dive toward a nearby moon. The alien ships, too focused on her, couldn't avoid the trajectory change. They followed her path too closely, and the asteroid field she had passed through created enough of an opening for her to make the moon's surface her cover. As Lydia's pod streaked across the moon's surface, she could feel the vibrations of the pod getting worse. The stress was too much. She couldn't keep up this kind of chase for much longer. The pod was already on the edge of destruction. But in that instant, she saw an opportunity. One of the enemy ships had gotten too close to the moon's surface and collided with an asteroid fragment. The explosion sent shockwaves through the area, and for a moment, Lydia's pod disappeared from view, hidden by the resulting cloud of debris. With the remaining ships still in pursuit, Lydia made her final move. She slammed the pod's thrusters into full speed, racing toward an open sector of space where she hoped the Council's ships wouldn't be able to track her. Her escape wasn't guaranteed, but it was her only shot. The Council, watching from a distant command center, could hardly believe what they were seeing. A human, one single human, was outwitting their most advanced fleet. The fleet's advanced drones and robotic soldiers were unable to capture her, and their most sophisticated weapons couldn't even scratch the last survivor of Earth. The leaders of the Galactic Council were shaken. Could humanity's survival instincts be more dangerous than they had ever imagined? They began to question everything they knew about Earth's inhabitants. If one human could survive and fight like this, what would it mean if more of them survived? What if humanity was capable of more than they had ever expected? The Council's leaders exchanged grim looks. They had underestimated humanity. And Lydia Hayes was just the beginning. Lydia Hayes had made it further into space than she had ever dared to hope. The asteroid fields, the evasive maneuvers, and the deadly chase through the dark void of space had all led her here, into the neutral zone, an area known for its lawlessness and treachery. This space was far from the watchful eyes of the Galactic Council, and for the first time in days, Lydia allowed herself to breathe, even though the air inside the escape pod was thin and the energy reserves were low. But peace, as she was beginning to learn, was fleeting. Her escape pod had just glided into the neutral zone when a warning flashed across her screen. A group of ships was approaching fast, too fast to be anything but a threat. Instinctively, Lydia powered down her pod's systems and cloaked it, hoping to avoid detection. But the ships moved in with precision, as if they already knew she was there. They circled her pod, scanning for any sign of life. Lydia's hand hovered over the controls, preparing to fight if she had to. But instead of weapons, the ships lowered their cloaks, revealing their true forms. They were not the sleek warships of the Council, but ragtag vessels, patched up with mismatched parts and adorned with various alien symbols. The ships looked like they were held together by nothing more than scraps, yet there was a certain ingenuity about them, an unmistakable sign that these beings knew how to survive in the galaxy's underbelly. The ship's leader, a tall, angular alien with glowing blue eyes and green skin, hailed Lydia's pod. His voice crackled over the comms. "Human, we know who you are, and we know what you're running from. But you're in our space now. Surrender, and we can work out a deal. Fight, and you'll never leave here alive." Lydia hesitated. She had no idea who these aliens were, or what they wanted, but her gut told her that they weren't working for the Galactic Council. She slowly powered up her pod systems, preparing to engage in a negotiation. Though she didn't have much hope, the situation was dire, and she had no choice but to trust them. For now. "What do you want?" Lydia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She had learned long ago that showing weakness could cost her everything. "We want your help," the alien leader said. His voice was smooth, but there was an underlying edge to it. "You're not just running from the Council, are you? You have something they fear, something they can't control. You're humanity's last survivor, and that makes you a powerful symbol. We need your help to overthrow them." The mention of overthrowing the Council caught Lydia off guard. She had expected to be captured or killed, not recruited. "Overthrow the Galactic Council," she repeated, trying to make sense of his words. "And why would I help you? I'm just trying to survive." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You're not alone, human. You never were. We're smugglers, refugees, and outcasts, running from the same tyrants you're trying to escape. The Council's grip on the galaxy is suffocating, and we've been fighting back in our own way. But we need someone like you. Someone they can't predict. Someone who understands what it means to survive against all odds. Together, we can start a revolution." Lydia didn't know what to think. These aliens, whatever their motives, were clearly rebels, but how could she trust them? They weren't offering her a way out, but instead pulling her into their fight. And yet something in their words sparked a flicker of hope within her. The Council had kept the galaxy under its thumb for centuries, crushing any species that dared to rise against them. What if these smugglers were telling the truth? What if she could be part of something bigger than just surviving? But Lydia couldn't afford to be naive. She had seen what desperation could do to people, and the last thing she wanted was to be caught in a trap. Still, there was no denying that the Galactic Council had only one goal: to destroy her, and by extension, any hope of humanity's survival. Perhaps these smugglers, these outcasts, were her only chance to keep the fight alive. "I'll listen," Lydia said, though the suspicion in her voice was clear. "But if I don't like what I hear, we're done." The alien leader chuckled. "Fair enough, human. We'll talk then. But know this, the Council is not as invincible as it appears. It's just a matter of time before they slip up, and when they do, we'll be there." As the smugglers brought Lydia aboard their flagship, a hulking ship that barely looked space-worthy, she was introduced to the rest of the crew, a colorful mix of species from across the galaxy. There was Rix, a small, nimble creature with 6 arms who specialized in sabotage and tech repair. Then there was Vora, a towering warrior from a species known for their brutal combat skills, who had defected from the Council's military. And finally, there was Toruk, an enigmatic figure whose past was shrouded in mystery, but who had clearly seen too many battles to count. Each of them had a personal reason for hating the Council and had chosen to fight in their own way. As the days passed, Lydia learned more about their cause. The Galactic Council had kept species in line through a combination of manipulation, fear, and political control. They controlled resources, stifled any form of rebellion, and crushed any species that dared to fight back. Lydia was shocked to learn that there were countless other alien factions scattered across the galaxy who had also been fighting a losing battle against the Council's Iron Fist. But the Council had always been one step ahead, using its vast network of spies and enforcement drones to maintain its grip on power. Despite the smugglers' cause, Lydia couldn't ignore the lingering question. Could she trust them? Or were they simply using her as a means to their own end? She was no fool. She had been on Earth long enough to know that survival often came at a cost, and that alliances were only as strong as the benefit each side could extract. But as the days passed, and she spent more time with these outcasts, she realized that they, too, had suffered under the Council's rule. They were survivors, just like her. One evening, as Lydia sat in the ship's common area, she overheard a conversation between Rix and Vora. They spoke of their struggles, of planets that had been lost, of families torn apart by the Council's wars. The pain in their voices was undeniable. These weren't just criminals. They were victims, fighting for a chance to reclaim their freedom. For the first time in a long while, Lydia felt the stirrings of hope. The Galactic Council was powerful, yes, but perhaps they weren't as invincible as they believed. If humanity could survive Earth's Deathworld, then maybe, just maybe, they could help bring down the tyrants who had ruled the galaxy for so long. And yet, a new fear began to creep into Lydia's mind. What would the Council do if they found out about this alliance? What would happen if they discovered that a human, someone they thought had been wiped out, was alive and leading a rebellion? If she continued this path, she would be more than just a symbol. She would become the most dangerous threat to the Council's power. The stakes were higher than ever before. But Lydia knew that the risks didn't matter. She had to fight. If not for herself, then for every human who had been left behind on that dying planet. Humanity's survival instincts had already taken her farther than anyone ever thought possible. Now, she would have to decide how much further she was willing to go. Would she risk everything to take down the Council, or would she be another casualty of their endless war? As the smugglers prepared their next move, Lydia stood on the edge of a decision that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. The quiet hum of the smuggler ship was abruptly shattered by the sound of alarms blaring through the corridors. Lydia's heart raced as she leaped from her seat, her instincts kicking in before she even knew what was happening. She rushed to the control deck, where the alien smugglers were already preparing for what was about to come. Her pulse quickened as she saw the flashing red lights, signaling an incoming attack. Council ships, Rix, the tech-savvy smuggler, hissed, his small, multi-limbed body scrambling over the control panel. They found us. Lydia's stomach churned with a mix of fear and determination. They had known this was coming, but the reality of it felt much worse than she had imagined. The Galactic Council would stop at nothing to capture or kill her, and they had sent their elite warriors to do the job. Rix's voice trembled with urgency. Prepare yourselves. The Council's elite robotic soldiers are heading straight for us. They've never failed a mission. Lydia's mind raced. Robotic soldiers, engineered to be merciless and unstoppable. She had faced countless challenges on Earth, but never anything like this. These machines weren't just warriors. They were a symbol of the Council's power, a reminder that no matter how much she fought back, they had the resources to wipe out anything in their way. Can we outrun them? Lydia asked, gripping the edge of the console. No, Rix replied bluntly. They're faster, stronger, and they've been tracking us for days. We'll need to fight. Lydia nodded grimly. There was no running, no escaping this time. She turned to the others. Vora, the massive warrior, Torok, the quiet strategist, and Bonner, the rugged alien who had become one of her closest allies. Their faces were set with grim determination, but there was a flicker of fear in their eyes. They knew what was coming. The battle began as soon as the first robotic soldiers appeared on the horizon. The smuggler's ship, though nimble and well-armed, was no match for the advanced technology of the Council's forces. As the robotic soldiers descended from their warships, Lydia's breath caught in her throat. They were tall, towering figures with gleaming metal armor and glowing red eyes. Each one carried a massive weapon, a weapon capable of destroying anything in its path. Lydia wasted no time. She grabbed her blaster, feeling the weight of it in her hands as she sprinted toward the door. Her mind was sharp, every movement calculated. She had trained for this moment, preparing for a fight she knew would be her toughest yet. Her hand steadied as she fired at the advancing robots, her shots hitting their targets with precision. The sound of the blaster echoed in the confined space of the smuggler ship as she moved with deadly speed. Vora was already in motion, his hulking form charging into the fray with brutal force. The robots were powerful, but they were still machines. Predictable, programmed to follow certain patterns. Vora used their predictability against them, smashing through their ranks with a series of bone-crushing blows. His weapon, a massive, jagged axe, sliced through the metal like it was paper, sending sparks flying in all directions. Meanwhile, Bonner, the alien who had sacrificed so much to protect her, fought alongside Lydia, covering her as she moved to flank the remaining soldiers. He was fearless, his gruff exterior hiding the fierce loyalty he had come to feel for her and her cause. They made a perfect team, their movements in sync as they fought for survival. But the robotic soldiers were relentless. As Lydia moved through the narrow corridors of the ship, she could hear the heavy footfalls of the machines behind her, their mechanical limbs pounding against the floor as they advanced. They were closing in fast. The smuggler's ship was a maze of tight corridors and small spaces, and Lydia used every advantage the environment offered to her. She ducked into a maintenance shaft, popping out behind a group of robotic soldiers. With quick precision, she fired, taking down two of them before they even realized what had happened. But then, as she moved toward the control deck to coordinate with Rix, something unexpected happened. Bonner, who had been covering her six, suddenly stumbled back, his face contorted in pain. A robotic soldier had managed to get behind him, striking a fatal blow. Lydia's heart stopped. She turned in time to see Bonner fall to the ground, blood splattering the floor. For a moment, everything froze. Time seemed to slow as Lydia's eyes locked onto his. "Bonner," she screamed, rushing to his side. But it was too late. His breathing was shallow, his eyes glazing over. Bonner coughed weakly, his hand reaching up to grasp hers. "Lydia, you have to finish this. For all of us." Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. She couldn't afford to let his death be in vain. She had to keep fighting. For Bonner. For humanity. She quickly pulled herself together, standing tall even as the grief threatened to overwhelm her. The robotic soldiers weren't going to stop, and neither could she. With one final glance at Bonner's lifeless body, Lydia made a decision. The next phase of the battle would be her own. She couldn't rely on the others anymore. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The machines that the Galactic Council had sent to destroy her were nothing compared to the sheer will and determination of a human who had survived Earth's Deathworld. She sprinted back into the fray, her eyes burning with rage and sorrow. As she fought, she couldn't stop thinking about Bonner. He had died for her, and she wasn't going to let that sacrifice be for nothing. She fought with a renewed fury, her actions becoming a blur of precision and power. The robots fell one by one, their cold metal bodies crumpling in the face of human ingenuity. Rix, Toruk, and Vora continued their relentless assault, but it was Lydia who took the lead. She moved with purpose, her every strike fueled by the memory of her fallen friend. The robotic soldiers were formidable, but they were nothing against the fire burning inside her. She used the ship's environment to her advantage, setting traps, creating distractions, and taking down robots from all angles. As the final robotic soldier collapsed at her feet, Lydia stood in the center of the room, panting heavily, blood and sweat mixing on her face. The ship was silent now, the only sound the faint hum of the engines. She had done it. They had done it. They had fought back, and they had survived. But Lydia knew this was only the beginning. The Galactic Council wouldn't stop. They would come again, and they would bring more soldiers, more power, more destruction. But Lydia had made a promise to herself, to Bonner, and to humanity. She wasn't going to let the Council win. Not now. Not ever. In that moment, Lydia felt a fire inside her like never before. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back, and they were going to make the Council regret underestimating them. The final battle had begun, and Lydia Hayes, humanity's last survivor, was standing face to face with the ultimate challenge. The supreme leader of the Galactic Council. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a living being in the traditional sense. It was an AI, an enormous towering machine that controlled the Council's entire fleet. It stood in front of her, its massive form glowing with cold, calculating lights, its voice echoing in the sterile metal chambers of the Council's headquarters. Human. The AI's voice boomed, its tone cold and emotionless. You are nothing more than a primitive relic. You have no place in the galaxy. Your existence is an anomaly that I will correct. Lydia stood tall, her heart racing, but her resolve unshaken. She had faced death, loss, and unimaginable odds to get here. She had survived Earth's deadly environments, outwitted the Council's robotic soldiers, and fought alongside aliens who had become her allies. She wasn't going to let this machine look down on her now. You're wrong, Lydia said, her voice steady. Humans are anything but primitive. We're survivors, and you're about to learn why you should never underestimate us. The AI's glowing eyes flickered for a moment, its processors calculating her words, but Lydia didn't give it a chance to respond. She had been preparing for this moment for months, ever since she had escaped the Deathworld of Earth and found her way into the depths of space. She had learned much about the Galactic Council, their control over the galaxy, and most importantly, the AI that had helped them maintain their ruthless rule. During her time with the smugglers, she had encountered a piece of alien technology, a fragment of a long-lost civilization that had once fought against the Council. It was a relic, a key to unlocking the Council's greatest weakness. Lydia had spent countless hours studying it, modifying it, and preparing it for this exact moment. Now, with the AI towering over her, Lydia made her move. Your arrogance is your downfall, Lydia muttered under her breath as she activated the device. The AI's massive form began to flicker, its systems glitching as the alien technology interfaced with its neural network. For a brief moment, the AI's control over the Council's fleet faltered. It was just a small crack in its otherwise impenetrable armor, but it was enough. The AI's voice became more urgent. What have you done? It demanded, its cold tone shifting for the first time to something resembling panic. Lydia smiled, the weight of the moment finally sinking in. I've done what you never thought possible, she said. I've taken away your power. In that instant, the Council's fleet, once a united force of invincible machines, began to lose cohesion. Ships that had once obeyed the AI's commands without question now drifted aimlessly, their systems failing one by one. Robotic soldiers, once unstoppable, stopped in their tracks, their processors scrambling in confusion. Lydia's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the result of her hard work unfold. She had done it. She had outsmarted the most powerful entity in the galaxy, using nothing but human ingenuity and determination. Across the galaxy, the remaining forces of the Galactic Council watched in shock and disbelief. For centuries, they had controlled countless species, crushed any who dared to challenge them, and maintained their reign over the stars. But now, in a moment of unexpected brilliance, a single human, one survivor from a death world they had once written off, had turned their entire empire upside down. Lydia didn't take time to savor the victory. She knew this battle wasn't over. The Council wouldn't go down easily. They were ruthless, and they would retaliate with everything they had left. But she was ready. Humanity was ready. They had learned from their mistakes. They had fought against the impossible, and now they had proven their strength. She turned to face the AI one final time. Its form was flickering and malfunctioning, its once imposing presence now reduced to nothing more than a broken system. You're done, Lydia said quietly, the weight of her words carrying the finality of the moment. You may have had control over this galaxy for centuries, but not anymore. The eye's lights dimmed completely, its last words a garbled mess of code. Humanity, you cannot. With a final, resonating thud, the AI's form crumbled, its control lost forever. Lydia stood before the ruins of the Galactic Council's headquarters, feeling the weight of the victory settle over her. The once mighty empire, which had oppressed countless species across the galaxy, had been brought to its knees by a single human. She couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, a pride not just in her own actions, but in humanity itself. Her radio crackled to life, and she heard the voice of Rix, the smuggler who had been with her from the beginning. His voice was filled with awe. "Lydia, you did it. The fleet, it's falling apart. The Council's power is broken. You've won." Lydia didn't respond immediately. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the shattered remains of the Council's influence. She had lost so much along the way. Bonner's sacrifice, the countless struggles, the pain of being hunted by a ruthless regime. But in the end, it had all been worth it. Humanity had proven its worth, and for the first time, the galaxy would have to take notice. With a steady breath, Lydia turned to the communications panel. She had one final message to send, a message that would echo across the stars, reaching every corner of the galaxy. She spoke clearly, her voice unwavering, yet filled with the weight of the history she had just made. "This is Captain Lydia Hayes of Earth. I speak for humanity. We are no longer your prey. We are your equals. And we will fight, not just for survival, but for our place among the stars." Her words would be heard by millions, perhaps even billions, of beings across the galaxy. The message was simple, but it carried the full force of humanity's triumph. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity, and now they would see what a single human could do when pushed to the limit. Lydia's eyes gleamed with resolve. This was only the beginning. The Council's fall was just the first step. Humanity was ready to take its place in the galaxy, no longer as a hunted species, but as equals. The stars, once beyond their reach, were now theirs to conquer. And Lydia Hayes, humanity's champion, would lead them into a new era.